When I was a kid, I used to love going to downtown Detroit to see Santa Claus. My parents would take us to J.L. Hudson's, was the big grand department store downtown. It still had, you know, the wooden display cabinets and the people that still worked there dressed in suits. And you took the elevator that had an elevator attendant up to Santa's village and stood in line. It was a real ritual. And I loved going to see Santa Claus. And it's that magical twist of wonderful and creepy, because Santa was kind of a scary looking guy at times, and you know they've made an industry online of showing scary Santa photographs, which I'll show you a few during this video. A Christmas Story was the movie that represented it, I think, in quite that way. You could either be really charmed by Santa or really terrified by Santa, and that's the delicate balance, I guess. But I do love Santa Claus, and I do have a couple of pictures of me when I was a kid with Santa at that department store, J.L. Hudson. And this story is about a man who lived as Santa. He was a professional Santa Claus, and lived as Santa Claus and had a very ironic death. This story is something I've known about for several years. In fact, I heard about it first from my old boss at Graveline Tours, the original Graveline Tours, not the knockoff, by the name of Greg Smith. He told me the story, and it was so really kind of interesting and ironic. And I wrote it for Find It Death, and I figured I would make a video about it today. And it's about Santa Claus. It's about a man by the name of Leroy Schultz, who was a Santa Claus, a professional Santa Claus. And he was born in 1927 in the northwest side of Chicago to his parents, Bertha and Loomis Schultz. He graduated from Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army for World War II. After leaving the military, he took several different jobs, working in retail and package delivery, and even attended a Lutheran seminary. In 1956, he was working for the U.S. Postal Service, and I guess it was monotonous for him, so he started taking side gigs, and he dressed as the Easter Bunny for Easter, and he dressed as Santa Claus for Christmas. And I guess he was really good at it. It was the local Sears and Roebuck department store. So they had him back annually to be Santa Claus. And he really enjoyed it. He said he really enjoyed, you know, working with kids and the people who thought like kids or enjoyed being, you know, childlike in their ways. And at that point, he was still wearing a fake beard and a mustache whenever he was performing or appearing as Santa Claus. Now, he had to leave the post office because I guess he was a diabetic, and it affected his work. So he went on, I guess, disability or whatever it was. So he decided to go full-time into the Santa Claus business. And he started growing his hair long naturally and his beard long naturally. He said, I have sparkling eyes, a fat tummy, and a flowing white beard, and I don't use any makeup. Somebody described his complexion as ruddy, and I looked that up, and it means a healthy reddish glow, not a substance abuse glow, but a healthy reddish glow. Now, he was still legally named Leroy Schultz, and he was so good at being Santa, the experience led him to a year-long stint at two different amusement parks. There was Santa's Workshop theme park in Colorado and Santa's Land theme park in North Carolina. And at one point, Leroy got married, and he had 3 children. And he said that his children at different times worked as elves with him as he was appearing as Santa Claus. Now, in 1970, he was recruited by a third park, Santa's Workshop in North Pole, New York, which became the sort of official home of Santa Claus in the United States. And he lived there. He moved there, literally moved there for 10 years, and worked as Santa full-time. So Leroy Schultz lived in the North Pole, New York, in a bright red house with closets full of bright red clothes, everything from a red leisure suit to red swimming trunks, and he drove a red Chevy with the license plates, all capitals, of course, Santa with the number 1 following it. Now, as much as he grew into it, his children kind of grew away from it. One of his sons was kind of like, it wasn't the greatest thing having Santa as a dad. It's not something you can really brag to your friends about. But Leroy was not disillusioned. They say, somebody was quoted saying, 24 hours a day, he lived and believed in Santa Claus. He never went over the edge with his performance, but he believed in the spirit of Christmas and Santa Claus. Leroy enjoyed being Santa Claus so much that he legally changed his name to Santa Claus. He said, I can't use any other name. Whenever I walk out the door, people see Santa. The judge first refused the name change to protect the Santa Claus name, which is kind of funny nowadays. That was back in 1980. Like they care nowadays. You can do whatever you want. But in December of 1980, the Social Security office let him change the name, but they made him add the C to his name, so he called himself Santa C. Claus, as in Christopher, to avoid any confusion with any other Santas. And the Screen Actors Guild even let him put that name on his union card, Santa C. Claus. He said that he never made a whole lot of money doing Santa Claus gigs. The wages were fairly small, in fact, dirt cheap. He says, being in the business for so many years, the top pay he ever got was $12,000 a year, and that's nothing compared to what the job required. He was able to supplement his income. He was really good, so they would hire him to do modeling jobs for magazines and calendars, and he did a couple of commercials. They said for Kodak, Avon, they used him for an Avon commercial and a JCPenney commercial as well. But he said, in the end, nobody stays in the Santa Claus profession unless they love it and they love children. He also was quoted, and this is a quote that kind of going, the adults play along, but the children, they know I'm real. In early December of 1985, he came to Chicago for several weeks for the busiest time of year. He was going to do Santa performances, or let's just say appearances, from early December till into January. He was going to be making a Santa Claus video that was going to be released, and he was doing appearances at orphanages and hospitals. He was staying in downtown Chicago on Dearborn Street at a place called the Talbot Hotel. And they say he was going to be moving to Chicago, back to Chicago where he was born, permanently. That's what his ultimate goal was. On the morning of December 23rd, 1985, a driver showed up to the Talbot Hotel to take him to whatever his gig was going to be that morning. And they knocked on his door and got no response. They asked the hotel staff to open the door for a welfare check, and they found Leroy dead. The 6-foot-tall, 280-pound Santa C. Claus was found unresponsive. The ambulance was called, and they transported him to the old Henriton Hospital in downtown Chicago, and he was pronounced dead on arrival. The hospital is now gone, and in its place is a very, very nice row of townhouses. So he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. December 23rd, 1985, 2 days before Christmas, 2 days before his 25th anniversary of being a full-time Santa Claus. There's some really twisted irony going on there, or some kind of karma thing going in there. I don't know, but just to get that close, to have that kind of, I don't know, that whole love in your heart for this stuff, it seems so bizarre. It's so sad. It's just so sad. The Cook County Medical Examiner did an autopsy on Santa, and his cause of death was ruled a heart attack. His sister had mentioned that he had been having chest pains for about 2 weeks prior to his death. He's survived by 2 sons, a daughter, 4 sisters, a stepsister, his stepmother, and 4 grandchildren. His sister, Betty Johnson, said, "He added a lot to the world, and he will be missed." Santa had a funeral at the Oler Funeral Home in Des Plaines, Illinois, and his ashes were sent back to Colorado. It's sort of confusing because he's Kansas and North Pole, and then supposedly he lived in Pennsylvania, and now there's Colorado, but his family are in Kansas. It's sort of a bit all over the place. But he was cremated in Chicago and shipped back to Colorado, where I believe he is buried, although I contacted the funeral home, who supposedly handled him, but all their records like mysteriously, burned in a fire or were destroyed in a flood, whatever it is. It's always that with cemetery records, always, always, always. But here's something that's interesting. In 2013, Leroy Schultz, aka Santa C. Claus, was inducted into the Santa Claus Hall of Fame. There is a Santa Claus Hall of Fame, and I didn't know that. The International Santa Claus Hall of Fame is the home of the celebration and study of famous Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus of past and present. This is an ongoing project to preserve the historical documentation of the many men and women who have greatly contributed to the legend of Santa Claus. And the criteria for being inducted into the Santa Claus Hall of Fame: overall career, service to the community, range of appearances, contribution to the Santa world, length of service, uniqueness of career, originality, and charity. Poor Leroy Schultz, aka Santa C. Claus, died 2 days before Christmas in 1985, 2 days short of his 25th anniversary of being Santa Claus, a professional full-time Santa Claus, which is so sad, but it's so interesting, which is really what this is all about, isn't it? So poor Leroy Schultz, aka Santa Claus, although he had a happy life, people, obviously his family didn't really get it or understand it, but millions of people probably did. He would answer, fan mail, Santa letters from the North Pole. He would greet kids 365 days a year. He lived it, he was it, and he seems like he was a really nice guy. He didn't make much money. He gave to charity. He gave his time to, visiting people like orphanages and senior homes that, he didn't get paid for that. So he seemed like a really decent, really kind man. And it's sort of, I don't know, he sort of got screwed by, dying 2 days before Christmas. But there you are. We all have our things. So I hope you like this little story about Santa Claus, and I hope you have a good Christmas, whatever year this is that you're watching this. It's 2023 right now, but I wish you the best. I thank you very much for your time. I thank you very much for your attention. And until next time.
You heard me.